everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Republican Rundown. Super excited to be back with you. I am joined today, as always, by Tommy Pigott, and we are also joined by our National Press Secretary, Anna Callie. Good to be with you guys.
Great to be here. Good to be here.
So before we dive into everything, we're just a few days out from the Super Bowl. I want to hear everybody's predictions. Who are you guys rooting for? Kansas City, San Francisco. Anna, who are you rooting for?
So I'm actually rooting for the most awarded great album winner of the Grammys now of all time, Taylor Allison Swift. I think it's really great that she put Travis Kelce on the map. All jokes aside, I'll be the first to admit that I am not the biggest pro football fan, but I will be tuning in to see if I can get some glimpses of my girl Taylor Swift.
So you're one of the Swifties that's giving the NFL some new business, new viewership.
Yeah.
I know there were some articles out talking about how they had received so much more revenue as a team with Kansas City after she started dating Travis Kelce, which is pretty interesting.
Exactly. I know there's some haters out there, but hey, I'm just here to fuel the great American pastime of NFL football.
Well, as Tommy knows, we're a big NFL household. My husband played in the league for 10 years, but not big fans necessarily of Kansas City or San Francisco. I was back at the Super Bowl in 2020, saw these same two teams faced off. I was really rooting for the underdogs, Detroit Lions, to get in the playoffs, or one of the other teams. Obviously, that didn't happen, so we'll be watching, but I'm not super thrilled with either of the teams. I would say I'm going to put my money on San Francisco because their quarterback seems to be like a really nice young kid and a good guy. So I'm rooting for San Francisco, but I think it'll be a tough game. Tommy, what do you think?
Yeah, I got some family in San Francisco, so I think I might be leaning that way. I don't really have a dog in this fight. If we can go full screen here, though, I want to show we have our RNC GOP football helmet here from the pre-debate show from a while ago. Some people might recognize. So I was honestly most excited about the Super Bowl because I got to bring this back out and put it back on my desk here. So that was one of the things I was most excited by. But I think between the two teams, San Francisco, I might be leaning that way a little bit just because of the family connection, family fans of that team. But I'm just more excited to see the game and the commercials, too. So the commercials should be great.
Yep, and the Puppy Bowl is always what I like to watch on Super Bowl weekend. Chris and Dennis, what are you guys thinking?
Both of us are thinking the Chiefs here.
Okay. Well, we'll see. We'll talk about it next week. We'll see what happens. But let's dive right into 2024. New news, as always, and some of the same old when it comes to Joe Biden. His administration, as we're seeing, now on a big push to try to make things seem as if they are going well, especially when it comes to the economy. They keep talking about how the economy is on the right track, inflation's down. A little bit later in the show, we're going to talk about fact-checking Biden, which, as you all know, we love to do, and we have our website, Fact Check Biden, as well. But when we talk about the economy, we talk about the reality of these prices. They are simply not good. Whether it comes to the cost of food, inflation as a whole, the cost of everything up over 17% still from when he took office. And we also talk about mortgages. It's something we have done multiple segments on the show. I've talked about it in Madison Minute as well. Tommy, let's talk about some of those mortgage numbers. Rates still up at 8%. The American dream just feels like it's farther and farther away for the average young American. Not the same as when our parents were growing up, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's outrageous that Biden is claiming that Bidenomics is about restoring the American dream. That's a line that he uses himself when so many people consider the American dream being about being able to afford a home. I mean, there's obviously many definitions. It changes for each person, but that's such a defining feature of what so many view the American dream to be. And he is putting it further out of reach. I mean, one statistic that we have our research team pulled here from CBS News is that homes are considered unaffordable in 99% of the country. In 99% of the country,
right.
Homes are unaffordable for the American family. I mean, that is the definition of destroying the American dream right there. And it's because of the Biden inflation we've seen. It's because of those increased interest rates that we've seen. It's a double whammy of just thing after thing after thing where the American people can't afford to save. They can't afford a home, and they're just barely able to get by. And that's the result of Bidenomics.
That's right. And Anna, you look at young people across the country as well. Rent isn't cheap either. So many people living there in DC talking about this. It's not just costly to buy a home anymore, but rent is now up over 19% too.
Right, exactly. And actually, a fun fact about me, my dad's actually a mortgage broker. So I grew up kind of around all of these mortgage terms, 30-year ARM. I don't know. I still don't know what all these things mean, but I have listened to my dad talk about this really for years. And Yeah, of course, rent is at record highs, but we also have, like you said, young people who are trying to achieve the American dream. I mean, look at Janet Yellen. I mean, back in 2021, just the start of all of the lies we've seen on the economy from the Biden administration, calling inflation transitory. And in the past year and a half, we've seen the Fed hike interest rates 11 times. And just like you guys pointed out, I mean, that is mostly to the detriment of young people who are graduating from college or joining the workforce. They can't afford to save for a down payment on a home because everything's so expensive. They're racking up credit card debt, which is now, the interest rates on that debt are now at 20% And that all compounds together to see that they can't afford to buy their first home. And then they're forced to pay those historically high rent costs. And it's no wonder that I know back last year or back in 2019, we had 57% of young people 18 to 29 saying that they were planning on supporting Joe Biden. That's now at less than half of that age group. And it's no surprise given all of these compounding factors that are making it truly unaffordable for young people to survive in this Bidenomics economy.
That's right. And I think Biden as a whole, his administration has been turning off more and more young people than ever before. But a lot of them still feel homeless politically. They don't know where they're going to go. They don't know who they're going to vote for. And so I think as Republicans, and specifically as young Republicans, it's upon us now to be chasing the votes of these young people, to be able to make that argument and make them understand that we are the party of a prosperous future. We are the only option to make sure that this country turns around and starts heading on the right track. Tommy, we've talked about this before, but what is that message that we need to be pushing to young people that aren't necessarily Republicans yet, but certainly feel that the Democratic Party has left them and they don't align with Democrats and certainly don't align with Joe Biden or Kamala Harris?
Well, I think it's two parts. And I think the first part is, like Anna was just doing, talking about Bidenomics and the fact that it's really life delayed for so many people. When you have to wait or you can't afford a home, when you have to wait to start a family, when you have to wait to make that move to that dream job because you don't have the savings, you're worried about pursuing that dream, starting that business. It's life delayed for so many people, especially young Americans that are just entering the workforce or have been in the workforce for a few years now. That life delayed then has affects the rest of their lives. They're playing catch up the whole time. The only way to change that is the second part, is the Republican solution to these problems. It's the fact of empowering small businesses, empowering families, lowering taxes. And it's borne out by the fact that where we see the most job creation, where we see the highest economic activity, where we see people moving in droves are Republican-led states. Republican policies work. You have the Democrat-led states where people in California, they're running out of U-Haul trucks because people are leaving so rapidly. So that's the two part here of saying that one, Bidenomics is putting your life on hold by hurting you financially. And the second part is to fix that, we need Republican policies, and that is proven time and time again by the states where we see those Republican-led states really leading in job creation.
Yeah, and I think another reminder to young people too is don't be fooled. Don't be fooled by the fake messaging that they're going to be continuing to put out throughout this election cycle. Don't be fooled by them telling you that the economy is turning around or that things are good or that they've created 18 million jobs. The reality is that's just not true. We fact check Biden all the time. We fact check the administration when it comes to the lies of what they say. And I think Tommy has a couple of these today that we can run through in specificity.
Yeah, so the first one that really came to mind, and something he's been repeating the last few days quite a bit here, is this absurd claim that he has created 15 million brand new jobs. And we have that clip here if we can play that.
We've created a record 15 million new jobs in this economy for more than 90 billion.
So a bit hard to hear, and believe it or not, that was the audio from the Biden campaign, not from us, so it just shows that they still have to work on that. But 15 million brand new jobs is what he's saying. That's absurd. That's mainly jobs recovered after the COVID pandemic. And just like we were saying, guess where those jobs are? Republican-led states as Democrat ones fall behind. Madison, when you hear Biden making this claim going out there, what's your reaction to Joe Biden making this bogus claim about jobs?
As always, not surprising. He always is saying things that aren't true, whether intentional or because he just doesn't even know where he is or what he's talking about. But still quite disappointing. I think it's very misleading. If you're someone who's not really paying close attention or you're very busy and don't get to follow politics all the time, you turn this on, you hear one thing, it sounds great. But the reality is it's not. And I think people are still questioning that. Even the people that may believe that when they hear it, they're still questioning the economy. They're still questioning the reality of what's going on because they're feeling it every day. I mean, whether it's their savings, which they've seen deplete over the past years, whether it's going to the grocery store and paying significantly more for their groceries, not being able to get as much, paying their electricity bills, pretty much anything you're paying for is costing more, and people aren't making more. Real wages are down 3%. And so I think people are feeling it even when they are hearing things like this.
Yeah, and Anna, when you're looking at these jobs, one of the things that is hidden within this report, because these reports go into great depth about the type of jobs, where they are, the industries, is the huge increase in people that are working part-time jobs for economic reasons, and the increase in people that are underemployed, meaning they're not making enough money to make ends meet or as much money as they really are expecting to. So you have an increase in part-time jobs because of economic reasons. And when I'm looking at that, I think that if someone's forced to work 2-3 jobs to make ends meet, that's not progress. That's actually hurting families.
Exactly. And the fact that he is gaslighting the American people, really trying to take a victory lap on this is absolutely absurd. I think back to what we were just talking about, young people. A lot of those are young people who are entering the workforce, trying to maintain the same standard of living that they might have expected 4 or 5 years ago. And that's absolutely not possible. And then you also have the fact that we still have a higher percentage of people who are still on the sidelines, right? The labor participation rate is still below what it was before the pandemic. So what about those people who are still on the sidelines, unable to re-enter the job market? I mean, it's absolutely absurd that he continues to gaslight and mislead the American people when they're really feeling the effects of this every single day.
So, and then connecting to jobs here are wages. Obviously, everyone works for a wage as part of what the whole equation is here. And Madison mentioned this already, but talking about his claims on wages, this is another area where Biden continues to lie to the American people. And we have a recent lie that he's told, if we could play that clip.
All told, we've created 14 million jobs since he took office, more than any president has created in all 4 years of a term. Wages are up more than inflation.
So he says there, wages are up more than inflation, which is a flat out lie. I mean, that is a provable statistical lie, not even up for argument. Anna, when you hear him talking about wages like that, I mean, what's your reaction to Biden just flat out lying about the situation of real wages in this country?
Yeah, I look at that clip and I wonder, is he lying to the American people or is he just absolutely delusional? I mean, we know that Joe Biden doesn't know where he is on a given day, but is he truly just not paying attention to people? I don't know. Maybe that's giving him too much credit. But yeah, again, I mean, he's gaslighting the American people. They know that they're not able to maintain the same standard of living that they might have expected even 2 or 3 years ago. And again, like we've said over and over on this podcast, I mean, inflation is up 17%. So every time people go to the gas pump, they go to the grocery store, they know firsthand that they aren't able to afford the same amount that they might have been on their paycheck 2 years ago. So I have a lot of questions about whether or not he's lying or if he just isn't paying attention. But
yeah, and I feel like either of those options is not a good option.
Right,
it's either
exactly.
he's not paying attention or he doesn't know the facts. And I don't know who's telling him this on his economic team, if that's what's happening either, because then they're not telling him the truth. And Madison, I think this also goes to the point that you were making about, not believing when Biden's trying to mislead people. And he goes out there a lot and talks about, checks he's maybe sent to people or different benefits he's trying to send to people. And I think it shows that in reality, he's going out there trying to act like he's for the working man, working woman, but he's actually undermining them with these lower real wages that are devastating families.
Yeah, not just as president. I mean, this guy has spent decades in government, supposedly serving the American people, from his state. And the reality is he didn't exactly do that. So after decades of being in public service, this guy has not been able to positively impact lives. And now as president, he's continuing the legacy of failure. And he's continuing to lead from behind. Not only is our country a mess, not only is our economy a mess, the entire world is a mess. And we have Joe Biden to thank for that. We have his administration and the people around him to thank for that. And that's not going to change until we see a change in leadership. And as I've said time and time again, even after we see that change in leadership, it's not an overnight solution. So we're going to see and witness and experience as people in this country, I'd say, a long process of turning things around. Yes, there are certain things that we can turn around instantly, but a lot of them and most of them we cannot. And so it will take time of having control of that White House and hopefully the House and the Senate as well to start to make improvements. and see this stuff shift. But we have to see a shift in order to see a change.
Yeah, and I think that long-term problem here is also borne out by the debt and the deficit, which is another major lie that Biden's telling that we're going to be paying for generations. And we're talking about young people earlier. If we could play the clip that Biden is talking about with the debt and deficit.
And we still brought the deficit down by $7 billion.
So he's saying that he's lowered the deficit by $7 billion. That is a flat out lie. And to be honest, he changes how he tells this lie almost every single time he says it, because he goes back to saying he's lowered the debt, which he hasn't. That's absurd. His policies haven't lowered the deficit. According to his own favorite economist, his policies have increased the deficit. And Madison, I think this is one of those issues that is maybe in the background for a lot of voters, but when you look forward to 10, 20, 30 years of paying this down, and Biden just increasing that deficit with all of his spending agenda, it goes to show that he's not really looking out for the long term of this country, I think, and he's just more looking for cheap political points.
Yeah, I remember back in 2015, Tommy, when I was writing a column for the Washington Times, writing about the fact that at the time we were going to surpass, I think, maybe $13 trillion of national debt, and what a complete and total disaster that was. And now we're, much significantly higher with our debt and our deficit. Really, a lot of people say something we can't come back from. So we could be paying this back for many years, if not forever. It's unacceptable where we are as people in our real lives. We can't spend money we don't have. Our government shouldn't be doing that. And they don't seem to have any remorse for it. A lot of these career politicians just want to spend at the expense of us and at the expense of our children and our grandchildren. And we deserve better than that. And I think people across both sides of the aisle, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, I think they all feel the same about that. When you break down the numbers and the reality of this to people, they're frustrated and they don't like it. I've talked to so many people being out on the trail, visiting, different cities across the country, sometimes not Republicans at all. When you talk to them about things like this that are just basic common sense, they tend to always side with us on it. Sometimes, of course, calling out the fact that Republicans have added to some of these as well in the past, which is a fair complaint that they have. But in general, we need to stand up and say that we can't continue down this road and expect to be a successful nation.
Well, and I think, Anna, to Madison's point that she was making about the different positions of the parties, Democrats don't even believe in cutting the deficit, it doesn't seem like. I mean, thank goodness we have House Republicans in there right now, because Biden wanted to spend trillions of dollars more, even on top of all the spending he's already done.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm a recent Hill alum, and I know we talk about this when I've been on the show here, but this could have been worse. It's hard to imagine, but I was on the Hill when less than a year ago, Biden tried to push through his $5 trillion tax and spending spree.
Add a couple more zeros.
Yeah, I know. Just a few.
Insane numbers, right? It's just insane.
Exactly. $5.8 trillion tax and spending spree that included 36 tax hikes that amounted over $2.5 trillion. So it's hard to imagine. I mean, already this deficit, it's not sustainable. And it's young people that are going to be paying for it. But it's incredible that it could have been even worse. And that's money that is already going to be coming out of Americans' pockets. But there could have been $2.5 trillion that we would have been paying for as well, had it not been for the House Republican majority stopping it in its tracks.
Yeah, and you look at a lot of the wasteful and useless spending over the years that we as a country have had, and it's just absolutely stunning when you look at some of that. I mean, when we're spending tons of money for gender studies in Honduras, I mean, why? Why? When we have people on our streets here in the United States who can't get the support, we have veterans, homeless, addicted to drugs, can't get the support they deserve, can't get an appointment in the VA. I mean, there's so many issues that we could be addressing right here in our own nation, taking care of our own people, and we continue to spend money we don't have and spend it outside of the country.
Yeah, and looking back to the first action that Joe Biden took legislatively, the $1.9 trillion he spent in March 2021, he was warned against it. So much waste. He said it was a COVID bill, when in reality, only 9% of that $1.9 trillion had to do with addressing the pandemic at the time. The rest of it did not. And even liberal economists called that the original sin of inflation. Even liberal economists were saying that spending fueled inflation. And we discussed this earlier as well, but this goes to the fact that people are going to be paying for it in future generations, but they're paying for it now in inflation. Even as Joe Biden is lying and claiming that costs are lower, we actually have a clip here or a message from Joe Biden where he's saying that costs are lower when in reality they're not. Yeah, so here's the tweet from Joe Biden instead of that clip. But you'll see there in this tweet that he's saying he's going to do everything in his power to build on our progress, growing our economy and lowering costs. Costs aren't lower. I don't know where he gets this idea that he's making progress on lowering costs when costs are up 17.3%. I mean, Anna, it's just another example of him lying to the American people.
Exactly. And another thing that catches my eye in that tweet is he talks about giveaways to the wealthy. I mean, this is the president who has passed these EV mandates, who continues to pick winners and losers through these environmental policies, shut down the Keystone pipeline at the detriment of not only workers, but consumers, and also giving benefits to communist China, sending work and finances over to communist China. So it's really at the detriment of the American people. So that's what catches my eye in that tweet, on top of course, all of the lies we've already talked about gaslighting the American people on the current state of the economy.
And Democrats even admitting in many instances, in reference to what you're talking about, Anna, with the EV mandates, the benefits to China on those. So a great example there. But one other favorite lie of mine when it comes to Joe Biden recently was in this clip talking about the border.
Every day between now and November, the American people are going to know that the only reason the border is not secure is Donald Trump and his MAGA Republican friends.
So President Biden blaming Republicans and specifically MAGA friends of Donald Trump for not securing the border. I think we need to do a little fact check here. Going back to the Trump administration, before the Biden administration, and the border wall materials that was already bought and paid for, the border wall construction was underway and continuing when Biden took office. But instead of continuing the border wall construction, instead of even just sitting there and doing nothing, Biden proactively worked to not secure the border and to stop the construction of the border wall. We have some facts, real facts about what Biden did specifically. We talk so often about Biden, his policies, his administration, his supporters in the Democratic Party contributing to the border wall crisis, contributing to the crisis at the border. But we wanted to kind of run down some specifics this week on what has really gone on that has contributed to that. And this is not by any means an all-inclusive list, but this is a list of some of those things. Tommy, you want to run that down for everybody?
Yeah, when we saw that clip, asked the research team to go back, look at some of the executive actions that Joe Biden took, just like Madison said, which were opening the border. He created the border crisis with the stroke of a pen. Joe Biden is to blame for this border crisis, and here are some of those actions he took. First was ending remain in Mexico. He ended the national emergency declaration at the border. He halted construction of the border wall. He auctioned off border wall materials for 3 cents on the dollar. He tied the hands of ICE officers. He severely limited deportations. He made it easier for illegal immigrants to receive benefits. He broadcasted the fact that he was limiting deportations worldwide. He restricted long-term detention facilities, reestablished catch and release, smeared Border Patrol agents, and right now is suing Texas for trying to secure the border. That is only the beginning of the many dozens of executive orders that Joe Biden took opening the border. And the fact that he refuses to reverse those executive actions, even though he has the authority to do so right now, shows that he's never been serious about solving this border crisis. In fact, this is the direct, predictable result of his policy, and he is to blame for it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at all of these actions and you cannot help but feel the intentionality behind them. This is not happening by accident. President Biden and his entire administration have been lying to the American people for 3 years straight. They say they claim to care about the border wall. They claim to care about the crisis at the border. They don't. They claim to care about the economy. They don't. They claim to care about the problems impacting the lives of everyday Americans, and they simply do not. People are suffering across this country. The border is a disaster. Our country is a disaster, and the world is a disaster. And it's very simply due to their horrible policies, their lack of leadership, and the intentionality behind the decisions they made very early on to cause these problems for our country.
Yeah, and it's a direct example of cause and effect as well. The fact that he's going out there claiming that he's not responsible when he signed these executive orders into effect. And when you look at the map, at the chart of encounters of illegal border crossings, it skyrocketed about a month and a half after Joe Biden took office once these executive orders started to take effect. That's a direct cause and effect. You cannot deny that. He signed these executive orders, then we have a skyrocketing of illegal border crossings. And there's one stat that I found really compelling when looking at this. In the 9 years before Joe Biden took office, monthly illegal border crossings were about 46,000 a month. Since Joe Biden took office, illegal border crossings every single month have averaged 200,000. That is a direct result of Biden's policies. We had the securest border in decades before he took office. And now, because of his executive actions, we have the worst border crisis in U.S. history.
Yeah, and I think also, Tommy, important to note that even when you're looking at that 46,000 number, I mean, people were still concerned and wanting to make sure that border got shut off and that it was secured, because as that number was creeping up, or the consideration of it creeping up, people were saying that was an unsustainable number, all the way down at like 100,000 being considered by some as unsustainable, as something we couldn't deal with, and obviously not safe for our country. I mean, it's insane what we're seeing.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. When we had a surge for really just 1 month or maybe 2 or 3 months under President Trump, which was in 2019, Trump called it a crisis. He called it a crisis, surged resources to the border, implemented policies, and solved the crisis. Joe Biden instead reverses those policies after they worked, and now we're seeing an uptick. And for years, Anna, he insisted that the border was secure, and now all of a sudden he's changing his tune because he can't keep denying reality, I think.
Yeah, and let's not forget that Biden and Democrats were calling it a crisis at the time too, right? And then now you have a president who, of course, is shifting his tune and blaming Republicans in the election year, when in 2021, he wouldn't call it a crisis. In 2022, they said it was seasonal. They said that it was due to root causes. So they've been changing their messaging all along the way. All the while, we're seeing these historic crossings. We're seeing historic amounts of fentanyl coming in, flooding communities, killing Americans. We had last year, again, House Republicans passed the Secure the Border Act, which House Democrats refused to take action on. So, all along the way, they were denying this crisis until it's convenient for them in an election year. And it's a real shame to the American people who are suffering directly as a result.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane what they're doing. They're not addressing this crisis. They're changing their tune with the political winds. And it also shows the reason why they have to keep changing their stories, because all of the things they've been saying for years, that it's seasonal, that it's not a crisis, that their plan is working, have all been proven lies time and time again. So they have to keep on changing their story. And the American people are now seeing it across the country, not just along border states where it's been a crisis for many years, for those 3 years since Joe Biden took office. But now in cities like New York and Chicago, it's really a worldwide scenario, and the direct result of Joe Biden's policies, Democrat sanctuary city policies, and they can reverse those policies at any time, but they're refusing to do it, and it shows that they don't care about solving this crisis.
No, they don't. And they don't seem to be changing their tune whatsoever when it comes to actual solutions. So people out there who are watching, do not let them fool you. Make sure that you are voting Republican in 2024. And of course, voting early, as we talk about. Visit bankyourvote.com. Check out when and how you can vote in your prospective state, and make that commitment to vote early. It really does go a long way and can help us win independence and win that election this year. It's more critical than ever before. We appreciate you guys tuning in for another episode of the Republican Rundown. We'll be back again next week with more. Be sure to join us.